respond in very different ways. I'm just showing you a couple of things here. One, the Daily Beast. A lot of people saying, no, I am not Charlie. And did that mean that they were not freedom of the press? Did that mean that they were pro-attacks? No. You see this guy trying to achieve a middle ground, and he just starts out shooting people is wrong. Like a lot of American critics of Charlie Hebdo were immediately saying that. When the only thing you're reverent of is irreverence, you eventually get, and I actually don't know what this term is, Chan culture, people who shout racial slurs and think they've accomplished something in the name of free speech. So this is you just have a sense, and I when we leave here tonight, I want us to keep thinking about the lines that have come up. And this is what's interesting about America. This is what's interesting. These are not state-sanctioned lines. Yes, we have hate crime, right? Yes, we have some state-sanctioned lines where certain identities are legally protected. But in terms of caricature, we don't have that. And yet, we are more restrained in our visualization of racial stereotypes in the mainstream media than France. So that's something, it's really weird. We have less governmental control, but we have more responses like this one. And again, the Anglo-American press, and I don't know what's going on in England on this issue, but the American press in any case was very reluctant to show that cover, very reluctant. Instead, we went abstract. Right? So the New Yorker had the Eiffel Tower as a red pencil, the editor's pencil, but actually that red also was the blood that had been shed, and this was a commemoration to the cartoonists themselves. What always amazes me is that there was really never any image to commemorate the victims of the Jewish grocery store who were killed the next day in what was a related attack. So there's lots and lots to think about there. I think some of it goes back to 9/11. I really do. And how images out of 9/11 were insistently abstract. I'm showing you another New Yorker cover here that sought to deal with it, not in terms of putting a human face on it, the way Charlie Hebdo did, but instead this kind of abstract face. This next thing, I've been thinking about this a long time, but this is a weird, it might seem like a small distinction. I think it absolutely matters. French census reports have no marker for race or ethnicity. So when you're part of a French population census, you're a citizen. And the idea there is that once you're in France, you are a French citizen, and race doesn't matter. And so there are no accurate records of how many French citizens are of what different kinds of ethnicities. That's a radical difference. All of you who still filled out college questionnaire or any other kind of questionnaire, that's a radical difference from American, almost any kind of census questionnaire, FAFSA form, anything, right? You're asked about your ethnicity and your race. So I think we have a better sense of who populations are, even numerically. That shouldn't matter, but to me, it seems like a striking thing. Again, what's going on in American culture, that there's more of a kind of a different frame of reference when it comes to representing race, again, in the mainstream media. The last term I want to introduce here is a term that was used a great deal in American critique, but is a term that is not active at all in French culture, and that's punching up and punching down, okay? The idea that there is a power dynamic in satire. This sounds like the world's smallest newsflash, but when it's acknowledged, right, it has enormous repercussions for who gets to make fun of who gets to satirize whom. So punching up, right, is somebody who is an underprivileged voice punching up to a privileged voice. The idea being that privileged voice or that privileged identity will not be greatly harmed because it's already privileged. Punching down is when a privileged identity punches down to an underprivileged identity. And that's what this author in Vox is arguing, is that Charlie Hebdo punches down. That, if you got one thing to walk away with for the American critique of Charlie Hebdo, is like freedom of the press is great, but punching down is not. Okay? And that right away is really interesting to me. First of all, that punching down is a colloquialism. I would love to know the history of the phrase. I don't think it's that old in American parlance, maybe. In other words, it's not like an 18th century idea. And it's something that is starting to get a lot of traction when it comes to how we think about satire. So I found very few examples of punching up when it came to the Charlie Hebdo situation, meaning somebody taking on Charlie Hebdo. And of course, there's a human factor here. You're not going to start punching up when you're mourning the dead of the attacks. So what's being punched up here is what's perceived as the racism that drives Charlie Hebdo. And again, Charlie Hebdo would say it's not racism, it's leftist politics, it's anti-religious, it's atheist, and so forth. But here you see, if you are, this is the address of the European flag, the European Union. So the European Union is saying, don't be afraid, I call it freedom of speech. But it's really this great big menacing dog called Islamophobia. So we have situations in American culture, and time always goes way too quickly, but we have situations in American culture where we see punching up, and guess what? It has to do with the same issues that deal with caricature, and that is race and gender and ethnicity. And Ferguson has a great deal. Like if you want to keep thinking about these issues, just do Ferguson political cartoons of punching up. So this is your police officer back then, your police officer now. This is a more pointed critique. The critiques always get more pointed the more physical they get. So even this is just their bodies. This is their bodies eating donuts, and it's already more provocative, right? Because it deals with their bodies. And here, the double phrase "don't shoot" of the population of Ferguson, and then here, the police force of Ferguson and the media, this complicated relationship. We saw another example of punching up when Sue Park did her Cancel Colbert campaign, and this was one Twitter activist going up against Stephen Colbert. And when you Google that, this is the only punching up thing that you'll see. Pretty much everything else really hits, wow. Yes, yeah, very hard down on her. So there's a response to that punching up, punching down that occurs. But this was on the issue of using Asian ethnicities in satire. Gender, of course, there's a meme. Memes as satire. There's a lot of those out there, and boy, do they happen quickly. This is a meme in which this guy on Tumblr, or this woman on Tumblr, I don't know, sticks a little David Hasselhoff with a thumbs up sign whenever somebody has an all-male panel. This happens a lot in certain disciplines like technology and so forth. And so this kind of punching up, and that's smart, right? But the idea, and this is so interesting to me, it's not an absolute freedom of speech rule in American culture anymore. I think France really wants to hold to that idea and say, it doesn't matter what race I am. It doesn't matter what gender I am. Religion is religion, and I'm going to mock it. And American audiences are definitely saying that, you know what, it totally matters what your race and your gender are. And that's why has that happened? Diversified public sphere, because Sue Park has an account, because more voices have an account in that weird flatter playing field of the internet. That could be it. It could be. It really could be accountability that we have more visibility of populations. That's something for us to be thinking about. There's also the consideration of just what happens after print media. So this is something that's actually kind of mocking all the different forms of media. So there's a podcast, a blog, a Twitter feed, and then a Facebook page, and Obama just has no more newspapers to speak to. So I want to end with a few images here, and I want to kind of end with, where do you think satire is going in American culture? Because I do think American culture does something very different with that punching up, punching down acknowledgement. The idea there is that the frame of reference when it comes to who the author is absolutely matters. And if you are from a population that has been underprivileged, you come at this from not just a different point of view, but a different place. You're punching up instead of punching down. So one of the satirical outlets that has just taken a neutral way of dealing with this is The Onion. And The Onion satire is really interesting to me. More and more, they engage in what's called this kind of flat satire. In other words, they just report things the way they are. So it's sadly unclear whether this article will put lives at risk. This was their response the day after Charlie Hebdo. And then again, this kind of just flat right? They're not, so Justice Department calls on Ferguson to align level of institutional racism with rest of country. Again, not necessarily singling out people. There's no bodies here. And then today, this was the one from today. This one was like intellectually complicated for me. Indiana governor insists new law has nothing to do with thing it explicitly intended to do. And then the thing kind of continues from there. So I just put the onion out there as we end as a way to think about how to exist in that punching up, punching down satirical culture that we're in this kind of flat way of doing it. But, that could be critiqued as well. And then this one here, we Americans, to whom do we owe them? Just to nonetheless remind us that the history of caricature in America is intertwined with that of France, especially this idea of freedoms. I mean, that's what's interesting to me, is that freedom of the press, even though it's not like the French freedom of the press, definitely comes from that idea of an absolute freedom that should be defended at all costs. I think Charlie Hebdo and the American response to Charlie Hebdo has really shown us that we are thinking about what that freedom of the press means. I put out there for your consideration tonight this critique of an absolute freedom of the press as a punching up, punching down power critique. There are others to be made out there. And so I can only end with this image. This was actually a cartoonist convention. It just says like bleep, cartoons. They madden us and they infuriate us, and here you have actually a French political cartoon of the 19th century kind of running in the foreground of the whole thing. But what's that? It's Condé Nast, exactly. The newspaper from the 19th century. So it's never far from us. I mean, I think it is important for us to think about Charlie Hebdo. You've seen me tonight make some distinctions between Charlie Hebdo and American culture and the critique of punching up and punching down. Let's see what happens next, even tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. I think Dr. Harris is willing to take a few questions from our live audience as well as from our alumni tuning in through the webinar. So,
and you've been an incredibly gracious audience.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone have a question? Not everyone at once.
I mean, the other thing I was thinking, like, so what do we do with these images? We laugh when we can, but I think that frame of reference keeps shifting around us. It's a difficult laughter at times. Do you guys believe in this freedom of the press? It's so important. And thank you for frowning, Hannah. You're absolutely right. Of course you do. It's about where caricature sets the limit of that freedom. Yeah.
I was surprised you didn't talk about iconoclasm throughout the Abrahamic traditions.
Yeah.
In particular, the Eastern Church. Do you have any further things about that?
I think that's one of those deep roots of caricature and the heaviness of caricature, which is, I mentioned that following of the second commandment, right? Thou shalt make no graven images. And within Christianity, absolutely. Western Christians, I always say, we're too Roman to imagine a deity without an image. But the big schism of the 12th century that occurs, it's actually really cool theologically. It's a simple question: does Christ suffer? And the West says yes, and the East says no, not like a human would 100%. And so it underscores the very restricted image of Christ as a human. Iconoclasm comes earlier, and there the idea was, we should follow the second commandment, absolutely. We, being Eastern Orthodox Christians, should follow the second commandment, and great debates about that. I think that's a very deep root of caricature. I do think it's part of the motivation for Charlie Hebdo to keep critiquing religion. But again, their critique of religion rides on ethnicity. Okay, so now I'm just going to tell you what I think. I think I'd be more interested in their critique of religion if it didn't ride so hard on ethnicity. That to me would be a massive difference from something like iconoclasm, for example, which really struggles with representing the divine and respect of the divine.
We have a question online from Jennifer Hallman, class of 2000 from Washington, D.C., who says, love getting another Ann Harris lecture after 15 years. Where do you think South Park falls? Punching down seemed to be heralded in that show.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I have so much homework to do. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I wonder if, okay, so I watched, last time I watched South Park was in grad school. So maybe the audience can help me out too. I mean, my instinctive response is this is that Borat activism, right? Where a show whose politics are probably critical of the very thing. I mean, let me just say it more directly. A show whose politics are left, but who winds up being kind of more extremely offensive about issues that the left holds dear. And I think of disability issues with Kenny, right? Are there other, I mean, there's also, there's a lot of religion too in South Park, right, as well. So the question was, is that punching up or punching down? I mean, okay, let's test out my argument. In your opinion, does South Park critique religion through ethnicity? Yes or no? And there I confess to not. Absolutely? Tell me more. What are the ethnic markers? Okay, so skin color, facial indicators. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a very good point.
It's animated, it has the voices, it has the cadences. So it's a little bit more complicated than just say something that is a static image.
Mm-hmm.
That you have to read.
Oh, there's voice. Yeah, there's voice as well, and voice can be highly stereotyped. I mean, again, if we'd had a whole semester building trust with each other, I realize this, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but it'd be very interesting for me to hear from someone who thinks South Park is hilarious and from someone who thinks South Park is offensive, right? Knowing what those lines are that are being crossed, and just think within yourselves. I mean, the question was, is it punching up or punching down? I do know that the animators themselves are white men. Right? Now, does that mean that they can't say anything ever about anybody but a white man? No. It means that we're thinking about what frames of reference they're tapping into, right? And so I need to do my homework and watch South Park, the movie. There's a movie? Oh my God. Okay. I will do that though. But I do know, isn't there a lot of Jesus in South Park? Right? Is Jesus white in South Park, or is he Semitic? He's like a... Okay. Okay. Oh. South Park. Okay, we'll have a great time. Okay, wonderful. Yes. Oh.
There is an episode of South Park where they address the. Oh, thanks. There is an episode of South Park where they address showing the image of Muhammad. And basically, the entire town freaks out because they think there's going to be a terrorist attack. So they all put their heads in the sand like ostriches. And then I don't remember their names, but then one of them wants to go stop them from printing the image. And so you think the episode is going to go that direction where like they're going to take that stance. And then he finds out that he's wrong and freedom of the press is way more important than protecting people's feelings.
I mean, protecting people's feelings. Yeah, I think an interesting thing to continue to think about is where we get our sensitivity. Why didn't I show you tonight the Holy Trinity three-way cover of the Charlie Hebdo that homosexualizes and really sexualizes God the Father, God the Son, and the Holy Spirit is like a triangle. I don't even know what's going on there, right? But I can't show that image. So what's going on? What sensitivity is that I'm exercising in that moment? I don't know that it's people's feelings as much as their identities. That's the thing. But I go back to that marvelous problem we've got of actually a pretty relaxed freedom of the press, but more of a discussion about what the limits of that press are from the people themselves. And maybe I'm not the only one in this room that wouldn't show the Holy Trinity three-way. And just saying it, I'm willing to say it, but to me the image is way too powerful to show, because images, like you said, especially still images, once they're in your head, they're in your head. They do matter. They are in your brain matter. I really believe that. They're not just two-dimensional ether things, you know, they're very real. So people's feelings, people's identities, to me, that's the sliding line. Thank you so much for the background. So we should keep on with critique, but consider the frame of reference, and laugh when we can. Okay, I'm sitting nodding heads. I mean, like happy nodding, not like falling asleep nodding. So that's good. That's good. But even at when you think about the images at DePauw too, there's always an editorial cartoon, right? And you can think about the frame of reference at DePauw is actually really interesting because it's small but incredibly diverse. And we've seen that over and over again where we've asked people in our public sphere, we've said, who's doing the talking and for whom? So I think those images, if you remember that they matter, I really appreciate you using that phrase, hurting people's feelings, because there's that connection between emotion and identity, where if it's not your identity, it's easier to laugh at it. But if it is your identity, you know, it's not so easy. And I'm half Swiss, and you know, people make fun of Swiss people. That's a protected identity. That's like just a privileged identity. Sorry, a totally privileged identity. So there's no harm there. As a woman, sometimes I feel differently, right? Depending on what I'm reading on Yik Yak, I'm feeling somewhat differently. And anonymity there anonymity there. See, that's the thing. Sorry, I will finish a sentence. It's not government regulations of the press, it's identity that I think we're holding ourselves accountable to in American culture. Yik Yak has no accountability, although of course you can be found out, as we now know. It's not truly anonymous in the technological sense of the term, but we always want to know who's doing the speaking in our culture, and I think that kind of accountability turns out to be more important than government regulation on this one. To be continued, for sure.
Thank you, Dr. Harris.
Thanks so much, you guys. Thank you very much.
Discussion. I want to invite our students and alumni online to join us for the next session of the Virtual Alumni College, April 22nd, featuring Andy Cullison, Director of the Prindle Institute, speaking on moral education and moral knowledge. So April 22nd at 8 p.m. Thank you.